Deuteronomy 28 to 30, continuing our list of 10 things that I'm just summarizing our thoughts about law about. Because of the miscellaneous nature of law, it's often hard to speak in outline terms when it comes to the law. So these are just some random thoughts that I've been thinking of over the years. I continue with number 6. I'd like to use the word accommodation or even permission. Now, we have an example. Again, let's use Deuteronomy 24, which is a case law, verses 1 to 4, about a divorce and a remarriage situation. I mentioned before that that was a case law, not a general law. Also, that's part of this that we see, and we notice this specifically because of Matthew 19, verse 7, where Jesus is asked, why did Moses give us a bill of divorcement in the law? And they're referring to Deuteronomy 24. Well, Jesus makes it very clear when he says in Matthew 19, verse 8 and on, God gave us those laws, Moses did actually, because of the hardness of your hearts. In other words, from the beginning, it was not so. God didn't set down laws about divorce hoping people would get a divorce. And so it just shows that many laws, I think, are written from society forward. In other words, we're starting with where they were. They're accommodating. The laws accommodate where Israel was as a society, and God is taking them forward from there. And sometimes it did deal with a hardness issue. By the way, I think sacrifice, the laws of sacrifice, are an accommodation discussion. In other words, Israel was sacrificing long before Leviticus 1. I'm going to call this more information, please. We have an example in that same story where it says, if a man finds, quote, some uncleanness in his wife. Well, what is that? Even if we know Hebrew, which we do, you can look it up, we don't know what that word means. And so this isn't just a rationale that is unclear. This is actually the meanings of words that are difficult. What I'd recommend always doing when we have this problem, and again, our commentaries can help us understand this, is just tread lightly on that law, because we today are so distant, 3,500 years distant from that time period. So that will not be uncommon, though. I'm going to call this practical theology. I have found that in reading the Bible left to right, the questions that we ask of the text are just different from the questions we ask in a systematic theology class, where we want lists of things and summaries and so forth. Well, the Bible is telling a story, right? And as you read the story, the questions and the answers are different than, again, a classroom after the whole book is done. I find the classroom idea, or the story idea, more valuable. And here's why. When we come to chapter 28, like we did today, and it begins in verse 1 and says, if you diligently obey me, and all these things that I've been saying, then, and you have a long list in chapter 28 of what God will do for the nation. Again, what is presumed there, practically speaking, is that the people can do it. In a theology class, there will be long discussions, and I've been through these, of course, I've even taught them, long discussions of is man able to obey God or not? Those kind of questions have theological formations about them over the years. The Bible doesn't get into those philosophical splitting of hairs, I find, and I find that to be helpful. It speaks practically. So I would go with that as much as possible. I always just presume when the Bible says if, you can, and it's going to presume you can. We're getting near the end, and I'm just summarizing again some thoughts about the law. Self-respect is, I think, the key to so much of what law is about. When we get to Jesus and he starts speaking in Matthew 5 through 7, the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor, and so forth, I hear him saying, I, of course, fulfill the law, Matthew 5:17, and I do so in such a roundabout way that I am putting a capstone on where Moses was always going, and that is, here's what it's like to really be human. To be human means ... And so one of my favorite stories here, this is in chapter 24, verses 6 and then 10 and 11, that if you take collateral for a loan, you can't take the upper or lower millstone of someone. Well, there's no value in the stone itself. Oh, yes, there is. A person can't eat if you take that stone from their home. Or verses 10 and 11 of chapter 24. If you want to get your pledge or your collateral for your loan, you're not allowed to go in the home of the person. You have to stand outside and let them go in. That's just a nice way of saying, learn to love your neighbor as yourself. Self-respect is really where we're going with so many of these laws. Even if, again, we don't understand them, I think we should always see that as a basis for where Moses is trying to go. And the last one is huge, again, because of where we are in Western society. When we think of guilt today, we often think of a rap sheet down at the police office, right? And it's a legal issue. The Eastern world, the ancient world especially, thought in terms of honor and shame, not legal guilt. And so we have that story. It's in chapter 25, verses 5 through 10, where a brother of a man who died, who didn't have male heirs, was supposed to take that man's wife as his own and raise up a child through her. It's called levirate marriage. And if he didn't want to do it, the woman was to come to a public place at the town square, take off his sandal, and slap him with it, because that was a shameful thing to not raise up the heir of your brother. Well, again, it just shows a different kind of world, but it's a world that has a lot of meaning to where we're going with the New Testament. And let me just say that in conclusion. Even when we talk about the gospel and forgiveness and how to become a Christian, I think it will be much easier to define it in honor versus shame categories than the common legal terms that we often do today.